Andra Watkins, welcome back to Freedom Over Fascism.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
I when we're recording this, we're sort of in between Hurricane Helene, which went into Western North Carolina, a place that hurricanes normally don't go, and we're about to face the landfall of Milton. And you wrote today about how Project 2025 really takes people's lives into its hands. How would Project 2025 change disaster response in this country?
In my view, there are two ways that it would change disaster response. And I first wrote about some of these things in February when nobody was thinking about disaster response because I was so appalled. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, that they would take away my National Hurricane Center that I check every day during hurricane season for information about hurricanes. So for me, it was one of the first things I talked about because I care about that. But the more I've thought about Project 2025, the more I realize that it's this two-pronged thing. So they have policies about how they would respond to disasters. They set out that they want to dramatically reduce or get rid of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which runs the National Hurricane Center, and they want to privatize as much of that as possible. They want to radically reduce the amount of money that FEMA provides, federal government, for disasters, and they have this system where they can rate a disaster as not a very big disaster, a baby disaster. So maybe you wouldn't get any money, or maybe you'd get 25% money. If it's catastrophic, which, the regime would decide what's catastrophic, you might get 75% funding, which is what everybody gets now from FEMA for disasters. So they want to introduce this kind of subjective rating system that the regime would decide, and they also want to do away with the National Flood Insurance Program, which would essentially make flood insurance impossible to obtain for just about anyone unless you were obscenely wealthy, and then you'd probably just self-insure rather than purchase a policy. So that's the primary things that Project 2025 policies recommend. They want states and localities to cover the cost of these disasters. They want the coordination to be done at the state and local level. And, living in a community that is impacted pretty often by tropical weather, I can say we do have a system in place to help each other. We do check on each other. We do know how to assemble the things we need. We know how to get in touch with people. We know when we need to leave. There are things on the ground in these communities where you certainly do come together in the wake of these disasters and help one another. But you also need an incredible amount of support from elsewhere to get the power running again, to get trees removed and other debris removed, and buildings that are damaged, sealed up, or torn down, or whatever needs to happen so that they're not a danger to people in these communities. So there's a lot that needs to happen, and that all can't happen with people in the community or even in the state, especially in a situation like North Carolina, where you have a massive swath of Western North Carolina that is decimated. A lot of it's difficult to get to. And even though you have a huge population from around the state, they have other things they have to do, other emergencies and things that are pulling on their attention in their own communities. So not having a dedicated disaster response plan on a national level is really frightening. And then telling these communities, well, you're going to pay for this now. Right. I know how much the people across the river from me get mad when they have to pay $1 more in tax on their properties. They just think it's horrifying that anybody would expect them to pay more taxes on property. So the amount of impact on property taxes for people living in these disaster-prone areas would be significant. It would have to be.
Right.
And that's not even counting what a state would have to do to have a disaster fund or put together a whole disaster response system of its own to respond to its own disasters going forward without federal assistance. So that's what Project 2025 calls for. But also, Project 2025 operates under a unitary executive structure where the president's agenda and the president's ideas and the president's wishes and the president's success are what matters. And so the Supreme Court kindly made the president that unitary executive the week of July 4th when they ruled about presidential immunity. So it really doesn't matter what Project 2025 proposes, because the president's agenda is what would govern the response to these disasters. So, as I wrote today, if the president's agenda is, I hate blue states and I don't want to send any money for any of their disasters, their hurricanes, their tornadoes, their wildfires, their flooding, we're not sending any more money to them because they don't vote for me. So they just don't get anything anymore. If that's the president's agenda, this administration would be staffed with people who would go along with that, where the last administration was not. People pushed back against that and still tried to follow the system that we've had in place since the Carter administration for responding to disasters. So, if the president decided, well, Florida's been hit so many times, but I have property down there, so these FEMA monies are going to go to build an island around my property and my cronies' property, and the rest of y'all can just sink into the ocean and I don't care, then that's what the president's agenda is. So that's not even illegal because it's an official act. He's directing the use of federal funds. It doesn't matter that he's directing it to himself and his cronies. So that would be what would happen. He could use his agenda to punish recalcitrant Republicans who don't parrot his talking points or who push back against the lie that, nobody's coming in to help, like
Right.
Bill Lee in Tennessee did, for example, trying to reassure his own constituents that they were getting help, contrary to what their candidate for president was telling people. I could also see a president like this making his agenda, well, Florida was hit, but, the governor ran against me and primaried me, and I'm still really mad about it. So they can suffer until he comes up here and genuflects these ways, and maybe in a few months I'll feel like giving him some money. And that would be the president's agenda. So to look at the policy positions that Project 2025 outlines is one piece of it, but to layer that on what kind of person we already know this to be, what kind of things he already did in his last administration to delay aid to blue states for wildfires in California, for example, refusing to send aid to Puerto Rico after a major hurricane, and then, making a big show of sending money to red states who sucked up to him.
Right.
I think that would be more what disaster response would be going forward. And that, because that's how authoritarian governments work. Most Americans can't really imagine that because we've never lived in that. So, you can't imagine that would be how money would be doled out. But that's what Project 2025 calls for, is an authoritarian government with a strong leader. So the money flows through the dictator, and the dictator decides where it goes. So all bets are off, in my view, as to how any disasters would get funded, other than the president and his loyalists and his cronies, which would change depending on his whims and whams, would be the people who would get the money and the help.
Right. Which we saw with COVID relief already with, as you said, disaster relief. Olivia Troy has recently talked about how she had to go figure out how many people in the area of a California wildfire had voted for Trump before he would even help. And I think one of the things that we need to factor in, and I think often think about these things in parallel tracks, is the climate warming to an extent that this hurricane bearing down on Florida. And by the time you guys listen to this, maybe it will have hit, and we don't know at this point how strong it will be, except that meteorologists have said it is as mathematically strong as the planet could support in the days before it's hitting. And we've had 2 hurricanes in rapid succession. And this idea that the federal response would be based on what the regime would want it to be. And I think we're seeing in real time how important it is that the federal government is out there, and we're seeing the people who support 2025 try to undermine the federal response by disinformation and telling people that the federal government isn't helping or not being clear about what the federal government does and how much it gives, to scare people more who are already like losing their houses, who are, you know, maybe they don't live in the disaster area, but maybe they live in a disaster area. So they're imagining their next disaster. And in addition to that, we've got online massive amounts of anti-Semitism right now that Pete Buttigieg went on TV to talk about this morning. Is that when you have a disaster, the most important things that you need to get going really fast are matters of life and death. You need power, you need water, you need transportation, and you need good and accurate information. And Department of Transport. And so we've got, at the front end, we've got the National Hurricane Center, which sends airplanes into the middle of hurricanes to figure out what's going on scientifically. And on Twitter today, there were some videos of Representative Maxwell Frost went on one of those 8-hour flights into the eye of and out of the eye of the hurricane, which is, wow, more courage than I ever had. And so all of those things are necessary, and the Department of Transportation is embedded in FEMA, and like everybody's working together. Different parts of the country are sending, their emergency responders. There are emergency responders from New York, now in North Carolina, from all over, and even beyond the National Guard, the president has sent in active duty military, which isn't done except in extremists. So one thing piles upon the next. You've got, this changing climate that you can't even refer to in Florida officially as climate change, but obviously is a problem because we're getting, it's October and we're getting like multiple hurricanes, one right after the other, because the waters in the Gulf have warmed so much. And that's only half of what they think it's going to do.
Right.
So I think what I wanted to just reinforce to people is how much life and death is really at stake. We talk about it as regards to women, which I would actually like to talk about again today, because you wrote about women's personhood this week as well. But following along, what is going on right now. So they want to get rid of the National Hurricane Service. They want to get rid of the NOAA. They want to get rid of the National Weather Service, and they want to get rid of mostly FEMA. But starting with the worst emergencies, and then the fact that these are hitting places where their infrastructure is already problematic because of their own state governments, and because most of the hurricanes hit red states. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter so much whether it's a red state or a blue state, but typically red states have infrastructure that is not as strong because of the state government's funding. So, and then to top it all off, you've got so not only do you have people lying about what FEMA is actually doing, but there's a very large population online that is blaming the Jews for creating the hurricane, and calling out the mayor of Asheville and the director of public affairs for FEMA because they're Jewish and threatening them.
Mm-hmm.
So all a big mess. But I think when we can't, I think we have a hard time imagining that kind of stuff happening here because we haven't seen it, or we haven't seen it in 150 years.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and what we can't imagine happening here doesn't mean it can't. It just means it hasn't.
Right. And I mean, it's hard for me to understand how people in these situations don't see how they're being manipulated, but they don't. Um, Obviously, if Republicans capture our government, all federal lands will be mined and extracted and drilled. It's all no holds barred on drilling and extracting every possible thing out of the earth that they can, so that the regime and its cronies can make money. So all of that will dramatically increase the rate at which these kinds of disasters, not just hurricanes, but fires, droughts, and floods, and we will have more extreme weather because of the impacts of that accelerated drilling and extraction, which is another thing to factor into this discussion. They're proposing to basically gut any federal aid whatsoever and make the people who live in these areas pay for and coordinate all this cleanup. And then they're going to be creating more disasters by the drill and extraction policies more quickly, more severe, by their government policies, and then they'll refuse to fund the disasters that they cause because of that. So I don't know how to reach people who live in these areas and help them understand how profoundly they are voting against themselves to vote for Republicans. I don't know if you saw, but yesterday my father called me demon possessed because of the work that I do. So, when you're dealing with people with that kind of a mentality, you can feel like I sound so logical and I'm making so much sense. This is so bad for you. Why can't you see that? Oh, you're demon possessed. It's just demons talking through you. So, I don't know how many people in that camp are going to be persuaded by anything.
Right. Well, and their leaders, Lance Wallnau made a big appearance last week because he
Mm-hmm.
hosted a rally where J.D. Vance spoke. And, listeners, you might remember my conversation with Dr. Matthew Taylor
Mm-hmm.
um, about the new apostolic reformation, which essentially believes that demons physical demons are fighting them, the soldiers of God, for control over every tenet of American life. And there
And
are,
that's not just an AR. I mean, I grew up in a church that believed demons
right,
existed and were possessing people all the time. And, we
right. And
always
then
had to
there's
keep
the
our minds
Catholic version.
occupied or demons would get in there and all of that. So, that's pretty prevalent in multiple strains of Christian nationalist thought.
Right. Yeah. And then
Lance
there's
Wallnau is just really good at talking it up.
well, there's a lot of people really good at talking it up right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm seeing more people, maybe just because the algorithm's so screwed up on Twitter, saying, hey, I voted for Trump 2 times and here's how I pulled my way out of the cult. But I fear that those numbers are quite small. So give me a second while I pull my thought again together. So we're looking at part of the country that will seem like it's more of the country by the way that swing states vote,
Mm-hmm.
believing and creating policy around their idea that white Christian nationalists need to be in charge, that immigrants need to be deported, that women are not allowed to care for their own bodies, that the federal government will be gutted and replaced by loyalists, and on and on and on. And one of the things that seems to be motivating people to vote, the low propensity voters, is to say and also we know that Trump and all of the team are going to engage in massive election interference and,
Right.
the technical term being fuckery.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to guard against that is to win by a landslide.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you see a way to get beyond this, or is it the work of decades to get beyond the position we're in now, where every election or every federal election has the specter of Project 2025 or 2029 or 2033? Or is there a faster way back to thoughtfulness?
Demographically, I think one of the reasons that white Christian nationalists and Republicans so much emphasis on this particular version of Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025, is because demographically the United States is changing so much that by 2030, it's going to be difficult for them to win anything. And I saw that. I follow some Texas writers. The trends there are fascinating to me because Texas is not a red state. It's a state full of people who don't vote. So in 20 years from 2004 to 2024, they tracked how many more Republicans were registered and voted and how many more Democrats. And it's conceivable that those lines could intersect this year, given how close they were in 2020. I mean, the Democrats added millions more voters in Texas than the Republicans have in that 20-year period. So it's only a matter of time before, no matter how much crazy they pull, no matter how much AI they make, no matter how many Russian troll farms they cooperate with, and how much Russian disinformation our legislators openly disseminate in our congressional houses on the floors of these places. I mean, I can't even believe that's happening. But demographically, they will not be able to win because they will not have enough voters to do that. My parents, as an example, probably won't be around in the 2028 election. I mean, a lot of these people are dying off, and
Although sadly, a lot are.
they're not replacing them with enough younger people, even though they focused a lot on young Gen Z men in this election, trying to radicalize them more and peel some of them off. But right now, we really have to focus on defeating them this time. And then we can't do like we always do and wake up the next day and go, yay, we did that. Now I'm going to
Right.
go back to my life and forget about this again until, the next election. I've been telling people who listen to me, maintaining a democracy is like maintaining a relationship with your spouse or your partner or someone you love. It's not something that you don't think about every day. I mean, plenty of people don't probably, and they have terrible marriages, and that's why. So, but that's what we have to put ourselves in a mindset of doing for our democracy. Strengthening our democracy is a daily job. It takes daily thought and nurturing and work to keep that momentum going. We also should have our own strategic plan for how to do that. And Democrats and the left are just so terrible at those kinds of things. And so I don't know how we accomplish that with the leadership we have. I'm not honestly very impressed with the Democratic leadership in Washington. I don't really think they're very connected to the rest of us. I've worked with loads of grassroots Democrats that I just adore, and we all work so hard, but I don't see that kind of dynamic leadership coming out of DC.
Well, they're not going to save us. And so the grassroots leaders that you know and that I've gotten to know will have to lead the way.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was part of a different, for Biden, the 2020 election, I was on a social media team. But soon thereafter, I started my own nonprofit, two of them actually. And we have to keep that going, year round, presidential years, non-presidential years, in every state. It's
Mm-hmm.
a battle, particularly the red states that MAGA has already captured.
My husband's here and he got a phone call. I'm like, go in the other room. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've watched with that, and now he made me lose my train of thought, but we have to be working on this all the time. And it doesn't have to be a heavy lift every day.
Right.
We have to come together and keep paying attention to this every day. I mean, the biggest mistake, in my view, that the Democrats made in 2008 was Obama won, we did it, and he won in a landslide, and America's a multicultural democracy, and we've accomplished that. Black people were not saying that.
Right.
But white people were.
Right.
Yay, we won. And, I read this book called Everybody Lies by this guy who worked at Google, and he said his premise was, I'll do a poll, Stephanie, and I'll lie to your face in the poll. I'll answer, I won't be honest with you, but I'll be honest with Google. So in the 24 to 48 hours after Obama's election, how to kill an N-word, Google searches went up exponentially.
Wow.
How to lynch someone went up exponentially. How to join the KKK went up exponentially. So if we had been paying attention to that kind of data in 2008, none of this would have been a surprise.
Right.
And so, that's the kind of proactivity that I don't know that the National Democratic Party, I mean, I had to beg to get any of them to even look at what I've been working on.
Right. And you've been doing all the work of pulling apart this document and
right, for months and months and months. And then when they go to work on it, I can't even get anyone to return an email. When I first started, I emailed my congressman's office and I said, I'm doing this work. Somebody in your office needs to be looking at this.
right.
And familiarizing yourself with it. And nobody even responded to me. And so, this attitude that the National Party has of, we don't really have to talk to you, we just have to talk to our donors,
Right.
has got to change.
It does. I was invited by a donor to a national women's conference right after the 22 election. And there was it was a one-day conference. It was an incredible lineup of women Democrats from all over the country, from Congress to Deb Haaland was there, Hillary Clinton was there, Kamala Harris was there, and the Alyssa Slotkins and the, all of every level. And it was amazing, but the audience was donors.
Mhm.
They are the ones that got the access. They are the ones that got the excitement, which is great. And we need donors for sure. But I think that we've made some progress this year with the whole Zoom situation that happened right after Kamala Harris became the candidate, when the Black women got their 44,000 person Zoom together in 3 hours. But then lots of other groups, particularly, the white women's group following in the footsteps of the Black women's group, got it together pretty quickly thereafter. And those are continuing, and a lot of those bigger Zooms are getting more attention from national level figures.
Yeah,
Whether we
I
can
hope
maintain
so.
that, I don't know.
I don't think that was as significant, though, and you and I both participated in this in the 24 hours after she became the candidate. It's get in here and give money,
Right.
because AOC basically told us that's all that's going to matter. If she's who
Right.
you want, then get in here and give so much money that they can't take it away from her.
Right.
Because of how the financing thing would have worked. It would have ended up costing them a lot more money to do that. So,
And it
that
also,
was really a significant thing that happened to make her the nominee. And I was upset about how all that happened, but I voted for her.
right.
I never was worried about Biden's age, because I was like, if something happens to him, she's going to be amazing. I
Right.
can't, so I'm not even worried about that. So I was ecstatic to vote for her. I'm ecstatic. I've already voted for her in the general election.
Oh,
So,
that's great. My ballot hasn't come yet. But.
so, I don't know how we keep people engaged in this concept of keeping our democracy.
I had this conversation with Mike Podhorzer, and loss aversion is one of the things that is most motivating to people. But for the ones who live in blue states, the loss isn't immediate, right? You need to be like, we can talk all we want, and maybe more women dying or more people dying from these hurricanes will motivate people, but I don't even know. I mean, I'm hoping that we can get more than the absolute base of activists kept active. And I think, we'll need to work all together on how do we continue this? Because I think all of us working separately may not work, but maybe if we find a way to all kind of come together as activists and say, okay, the rest of you people, you had your moment, you gave your money through Act Blue, you like, okay, now you want to keep it, you got to do the work. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things for me that's been, it's not easy, but writing about Project 2025, it, you just read it and go, well, this is what it says and this is what it means for you. You know, we don't have anything like that. This is, how we want to strengthen our democracy, and these are the policy positions that we're going to implement to make that happen. We don't, Democrats don't think that way, and I honestly don't know if enough of them could agree on what would be on that list to do it by the midterms anyway. It's that's another thing that's tough about the left is you're just herding such a big tent of cats
You are.
who have, very different priorities, and all the priorities are important. It's just there's no realism about how to funnel that into something that's going to strengthen our democracy in the short term and the long term. You may not be able to get exactly what you want today, but let's make a plan for how you can have exactly what you want in 5 years or 10 years. That's what I told, having been a Republican in my own life for so long, that's what I told Michael about DEI and the teaching of critical race theory. Those things are so vital and so important, and they need to be done. But I feel like they would have had more success if they had worked like Republicans do to get in at some ground level and infiltrate this and infiltrate that, do a little bit over here and a little bit over there and let it work up
Right.
instead of forcing it from the top, because
Well,
they had the muscle at the top to do that right away. I understand the desire to do that. I understand that all those things should have been going on the whole time, and that we shouldn't have a need for that because we shouldn't have been such a crummy country of people to a whole sector of humanity. But I just don't know how a lot of these strategies get decided. And I don't know that people think through how terrified a whole mass of people are going to be by these things when they've been, indoctrinated to fear everything for decades already. And then you hit them with something like this and they just, they can't handle it. And so, they've been very good at reading us and predicting what we will do and coming up with all kinds of those things to infiltrate the courts and infiltrate our government. And,
I
so
think,
I don't know why we can't work that way.
well, they're more patient.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even though we know that we can flip really red states if we work at it hard enough and if we contest more and enough seats and if we give it enough money, nobody has the attention span to think in terms of a decade versus a cycle.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Also, they're used to following figures of authority, whereas we're like critical
No, my
thinkers.
idea is the best. I'm going to just go over
Right?
here and start my nonprofit and do it myself.
Right. Exactly. Because if it's not happening there, I got to do it. But but then there's these big people that already have audiences, and then like it gets all messed up because
Yeah.
you don't know who to rally around. And maybe having more people to rally around is the way, but I think the long-term nature of Republican plans has been something that we haven't figured out yet. And we're only just now noticing that they worked really long on this stuff. They started working against Roe the minute Roe was passed. Was decided. They started working on judges in the 70s and 80s. They started working on states, and it took 20, 30, 40 years in some cases, but they kept at it. And I don't think have that kind of attention span. Maybe we're all neurodiverse and that's why. Which,
Well, I mean,
can produce more critical thinking.
I spend a lot of time out of the country, as you know, and so my life is completely different when I'm in Spain because I don't live with this constant hum of outrage there. My life is just so different because that doesn't exist. Yeah, they have their protests. I live on the street where they have a lot of them. They're out there mad about something at least once a week. But they come out there and they scream into their bullhorns and wave their flags and throw their trash. And then they go to the bar and all have, siesta happens and they go and have lunch and, it's over. And, so it's just a very different mentality. And it's forced me to think about how I spend my time because we're so focused in America on productivity. Everything has to be productive. You just can never not be productive. If somebody calls me in the middle of the day and says, "What are you doing?" Well, I'm reading a book. Well, when do you have time to read a book in the middle of the day? What, you don't have anything to do? It's like,
Well, you do. You have to read a book.
I'm reading a
No,
book.
but
So it's, that to me is one of our biggest challenges.
yeah,
People are just so overwhelmed and they have so much to do. And so many of the things that we used to do to decompress now are things that you have to pay for or things that have some sort of productivity element attached to them to be able to do them, which creates stress around them that people, and we just don't nurture each other very well. We don't take care of each other very well. And I'm not going to change any of that. But it's a big problem and it's become more glaring to me. I'll come back here and have some kind of bodily reaction that I have to work through to being
absolutely.
in this country. It physically makes me ill and I have to work through that and get to the place where, okay, I can handle all the extra pressure and stress that I feel just because I'm here.
It's right. And being where you're here is different and worse than my here,
Mm-hmm.
simply because of where we live. I
Right.
mean, where we started, where we end up.
Because you've been a blue state person your whole life, and I've been a red state person my whole life. So it's
Right. And that
completely
was
different.
right. And my grandparents moved from New York to Los Angeles in 1951. Who does that? All of the family was still in New York.
Mm-hmm.
My grandparents moved. So, like, I think that people in blue states are often from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more movement, but that also means we don't have any family living nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Neither my husband nor I. Like, we're going to have to switch states if we want to be somewhere near,
Or you build
somebody's parents.
family around you that you want to make into that. We're going to live in Spain, and we don't have any family there. So
Right.
you find those people.
You find those people, but then your parents still need, you know,
Yeah.
sandwich.
Yeah.
Sandwich.
Yeah.
So,
So
all right, we've
it's
got to turn this around. We got to have some
okay.
like positive before we wrap up, because I'm getting depressed and that is no good, because then all I will want to do the rest of the day is read a book. And while that's
I told
fine,
somebody the other day, I feel so bad because I have so much to say, and then everybody's like, "Wow, this is terrifying. I'm so depressed, and I feel so bad." And it's just like, "Yay! I'm so glad I've, you know, depressed another group of people." Okay.
okay. So, what have you read or watched recently that has given you a sense of enjoyment and escape and has not been depressing?
My husband and I, we were rewatched Idiocracy the other night with our sister-in-law, his sister, and laughed quite a bit. Michael hadn't seen it in a while, so that was funny. I am reading a lot of smutty romance novels that
It's the
really make
best.
me, always end happily and have lots of smutty smut, and it's so much fun. And I talk about that all the time, and I'm so proud of my smutty reading. So,
Well, you
um,
should be. I mean,
well, I mean,
romance gets a really bad name, but it's actually the
well,
best-selling genre.
it's because it's written by women.
Right.
So it's written by women, so of course it's not serious. So I proudly buy all these smutty romance novels. I spent almost $1,000 on books this year, buying books of other writers. They're all women and supporting women and reading them, instead of having that extra coffee or whatever. That's what I do with some of my money. So I've had quite a number of those that I've enjoyed. I did go to New Mexico for the first time 2 weeks ago. It was on my list of places to go. And I'd never been. I saw a picture of Casa Grande in Colorado in a book when I was in elementary school and thought, oh, it would be so cool if I could go there someday. So I finally did. And we put 1,000 miles on the car in 4 days and hit
Wow.
multiple national parks and areas and saw a lot of really old indigenous structures and just an incredible landscape. So that was a really nice break from my work and worrying about this stuff all the time. So we got our visa appointment and I go next week for that. So there's a lot of good happening.
That's awesome. I will just put in a plug for I've been watching Interview with the Vampire. It's been fantastic.
Is that a series now, or is it the original? Because I don't
It's
stream much of anything, so I'm so ignorant of all that stuff.
it is a series,
Okay.
a new series that is based on the books,
Yeah.
but updated.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, uh, how when there was the series or the movies or whatever, it was all very sanitized in the past. And now it has, it's not necessarily more bloody, although it is, but they also have queer characters. Like Louis and Lestat aren't just kind of friends,
Right. Well, there
right?
were undertones of that in the
Yeah,
movie.
but you had to look a whole lot farther. So,
It was a long time
um,
ago, so that wasn't as okay. Yeah, it was just kind
no,
of like implied. Yeah.
it's well acted. It's great. Its first season is on Netflix, and the second one you have to watch on AMC Plus, which I got a free week for. So
So you'll
hopefully I
binge
can get
watch
through
it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I read romance novels too. I'm just waiting for a good one to come out because I'm
Now
also picky.
people keep recommending me these highbrow books, and I'm just like, I can't. I read too much heavy stuff for my
It
work, so
has to have a
I
happy ending.
has to have a happy ending and some smutty scenes in it, or at least I can think there are going to be, or I just can't get through.
I am on the romance train with you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. And we'll keep working on, keeping people on the democracy train too.
Well, we can do it. I mean, I'm very schizophrenic about the election. Some days I feel in the same hour despair and euphoria about it. But I really do believe we can win this. Um, you and I both talk to a lot of grassroots people, and people are working really hard and they're getting a lot of good response. So I'm really positive about what we can accomplish in this election.
I am
So
too, but occasionally that doubt creeps in. So,
of course it
so
does.
you
And
keep
I have
going.
those moments myself, but overall, I'm really positive about the work we're doing and what is possible. So as long as people vote.
Right.
So.
Well, thank you for coming on. I'm going to stop the recording.